Welcome to the 902 Podcast, the official podcast of the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office in Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm Captain John Vick, and I want to thank you for listening. This podcast will give you an inside look at LSO with topics and guests to discuss public safety issues impacting Lancaster County. Be sure to subscribe for highlights on news, cases, and the people working for you at LSO. You can also follow us across social media at LSO Nebraska on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Welcome to the 902 Podcast. We're in studio today without the sheriff and chief, and it's just me as they're off busy doing some other sheriffing for the week, but we are going to have an episode to talk a little bit about one of the foundations for LSO's mission and values, and that comes back to a gentleman named Sir Robert Peel. And in 1829, Sir Robert Peel established the London Metropolitan Police Force. He became known as the father of modern policing, and his commissioners established at the time 9 principles of policing that remain as crucial and urgent today as they were 2 centuries ago. So we're going to walk through these 9, what are called the 9 Peelian principles. It's kind of a gold standard in law enforcement. Walk through these a little bit, unpack them, and talk about how they're put into place at the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. So without further ado, number 1, the basic mission for which police exist is to prevent crime and disorder as an alternative to the repression of crime and disorder by military force and severity of legal punishment. Now, what that kind of means to us in modern context is that once upon a time, police forces were largely military, and it was the military force of the government that kept societies in order from ancient times through the Middle Ages, really up to the modern era. Sheriffs, as we've discussed all the way back in episode 0, were the first non-military law enforcement officials in recorded history, and that's kind of unfolded since then. So that's why the basic mission for which police exist, and sheriffs in our case, is to prevent crime and disorder and put together programs and tactics and procedures that hopefully, if we're doing things right, will prevent crime and disorder from occurring as an alternative to the repression of crime and disorder by force and severity of legal punishment. Now, certainly just by the nature of things, we still have to maintain law and order, and law enforcement does still maintain somewhat of a judicial hammer, so to speak, as a part of the bigger legal process. But just simply enforcing and making arrests, trying to compel that compliance from people is really secondary to our primary goal, which is hopefully to prevent crime and disorder from happening in the first place. So then we'll move on to the second Peelian principle, and that's the ability of the police to perform their duties as dependent upon public approval of police existence, actions, behavior, and the ability of the police to secure and maintain public respect. Big reason for why we even do the podcast in the first place is to try to gain that public trust and that public respect and provide you as our listeners with an understanding for why we do what we do and how we do it. So again, the ability of the police to perform their duties is dependent on exactly that, on the public approval of what we're doing, our existence, our actions, our behaviors, and our ability to secure and maintain that public respect and trust. Those things all work together to be able to make sure that we're having a Lancaster County that's a safe place to live, work, and play. The third Peelian principle says that the police must secure the willing cooperation of the public in voluntary observance of the law and be able to secure and maintain public respect. So building off the second one, we're always trying to seek voluntary compliance. Everything from traffic laws to criminal laws. Truth be told, there are simply not enough of us to just go and arrest ourselves out of any problem. We have to have the willing cooperation of the public to voluntarily observe the laws that are on the books in the state of Nebraska and the various municipalities that we patrol. And being able to secure that willing cooperation is absolutely vital to our mission of keeping Lancaster County safe. Now, the next one is the degree of cooperation of the public that can be secured diminishes proportionately the necessity for the use of physical force and compulsion in achieving police objectives. So it's kind of self explanatory that the more cooperation that we're able to achieve from the public and the more we're able to secure from the public, it diminishes the amount or the requirement that we use physical force or compulsion at all. Again, law enforcement has a place in society to be that hammer to some extent, to be able to use force when reasonable and when necessary to enforce the law. But that's really not our first go-to. That's not our first tool in our toolbox. We would much rather use voluntary compliance, and that level of cooperation and voluntary compliance reduces the need for physical force and compulsion. So when we're talking about a lot of these events, and I know there's been a lot of different amounts of civil unrest that have come up in the last several years with COVID, with some of the public unrest about race relations. These are all things that can kind of spin up things in various communities that, number one, erode public trust, and there's a wide variety of reasons that go into that. But then it also causes people a little bit of hesitation as to whether or not they want to cooperate with the police, and this becomes this vicious cycle of diminishing that public trust, diminishing that degree of cooperation, and it can actually have the opposite effect on the amount of physical force and compulsion that are needed to achieve police objectives. Because if we're not able to achieve those police objectives, which again, going back to Pelian principle number one, to prevent crime and disorder, to keep our communities safe, all of these things have to work together so that we're able to provide the safe types of communities that the public rightly expects and that crime victims deserve.
If you want a challenging career, a career where you can make a difference in your life, your family's life, and the lives of those in your community, come and join the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. To learn more or to apply, visit us online at www.joinlso.com.
Moving on to Pelian principle number 5, the police seek and preserve public favor, not by catering to public opinion, but by constantly demonstrating absolutely impartial service to the law, in complete independence of policy, and without regard to the justice or injustice of the substance of individual laws. By ready offering of individual service and friendship to all members of the society, without regard to their race or social standing, by ready exercise of courtesy and friendly good humor, and by ready offering of the individual sacrifice in protecting and preserving life. And that's a long one. But if we break it down to just the simple concepts of that particular Pelian principle, it really goes back to our standards as law enforcement officers and our ethics. We are not here to cater to public opinion. We are here to constantly dedicate ourselves to impartial service of the law. We do not write the laws. We are not part of the legislative branch of government. Those discussions are saved for folks in county commissioner and city council chambers, for the state legislature down the street at the Nebraska Capitol. But we recognize that our part in this is to impartially enforce the law, and we've all taken an oath to do that, regardless of our individual feelings or our beliefs on certain policies. But we've dedicated ourselves to the concept, to the Constitution, to the laws of the state of Nebraska, the Constitution of the state of Nebraska, to enforce that impartially and be able to provide that equal service to all members of society, regardless of race, regardless of social standing. That was a little bit more of a term probably back in 1829 when Sir Robert Peel created these Pelian principles. But again, ready offering of individual sacrifice in protecting and preserving life. And that is ultimately what law enforcement officers are called to do, is to protect and preserve life in the communities where we serve. Pelian principle number 6, the police should use physical force to the extent necessary to secure observance of the law or to restore order only when the exercise of persuasion, advice, and warning is found to be insufficient to achieve police objectives, and police should use only the minimum degree of physical force which is necessary on any particular occasion for achieving a police objective. So, again, this was written back in the early 1800s. And how relevant is that still almost 200 years later? The police should only use the physical force which is necessary. And we always base our use of physical force on what is reasonably necessary. Those are Supreme Court terms, reasonably necessary to make arrests, to achieve the lawful law enforcement objectives that we're trying to obtain. And again, we do lean on persuasion, advice, and warning, again, seeking that voluntary compliance and only using force as a last resort, and even then to the minimum degree possible to achieve those law enforcement objectives. None of us show up to work hoping to get into a fight, to get into some sort of use of force encounter. And we do take that very seriously at the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office, and certainly prefer to use persuasion, advice, and warning to achieve voluntary compliance with the law whenever possible. Peelian principle number 7, the police at all times should maintain a relationship with the public that gives reality to the historic tradition that the police are the public and the public are the police. The police are the only members of the public who are paid to give full-time attention to duties which are incumbent on every citizen in the interests of the community welfare. This is actually a statement that we read a couple times a year. We do a badging ceremony for our new deputies. A lot of times it's at the Lancaster County Board of Commissioners meeting, and we will swear in new deputies who have graduated from their academy training, from their field training program, and are now out on solo patrol. And we read this particular Peelian principle to them, to their friends and families, to our other deputies that are in the audience and other members of the community and county government, because it really is true. When a police officer or a deputy sheriff in our case is putting a badge on, they are really just taking on that role to give full-time attention to duties which are incumbent on every citizen in the interest of the community welfare. And it really does take all of us, number one, to voluntarily submit to compliance with laws that we've all agreed to through our representative form of government, but also we as law enforcement officers on our role have to maintain that relationship that remembers that we are the police, but the police are the public, and the public are also the police, and we share that common interest of the community welfare. And it really takes all of us working together. If we again go back to the basic mission for which police exist, is to prevent crime and disorder, and that is certainly as true today as it was almost 200 years ago. Number 8, the police should always direct their actions towards their functions and never appear to usurp the powers of the judiciary by avenging individuals or the state, or authoritatively judging guilt or punishing the guilty. As law enforcement officers, we have to recognize that we are a part of the justice system. We are not the only piece of the justice system. I mentioned earlier that sometimes law enforcement does have to serve as the hammer, and I use that term figuratively, but we do sometimes have to use force, and we are the arm of the court that sometimes is directed to use force to secure certain objectives for the government, whether that's arresting someone who's violated a crime, whether that's evicting someone from their home. Those are last resort types of things when we have to use force to be able to do that. But we also have to recognize that we have a place to play in the justice system, but that we are not the only piece. We are not the judge, jury, and executioner, as you sometimes hear in popular culture, people talking about. We have a role to play in the justice system, but then we have to turn our piece of the puzzle over to the prosecutors, so they can, if we make an arrest, they review and then file formal charges, and then it's ultimately up to the prosecutor's office to bring those charges before the courts to determine if someone is guilty or not guilty of the offense that they are suspected of committing. So law enforcement officers have to remember, and we do at the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office, that we are a piece of the justice system, not the whole of the justice system. The last Peelian principle, the 9th one, is one of my favorites. And it says the test of police efficiency is the absence of crime and disorder, not the visible evidence of police action in dealing with them. And for me, this really says that the proof is in the pudding. If law enforcement in any community is being effective, the test for that is really whether or not crime and disorder is occurring, not just seeing 100 cops out on the street and doing their business and shaking people down, taking people to jail, things like that. I don't think that's something that any of us want in our community. I certainly hope that members of Lancaster County will smile and wave if they see us. We love seeing people out and about. And that's part of it, is letting people know that we're out there for traffic enforcement, things like that, reminders to slow down and be safe. But the true test of our effectiveness, of our efficiency, is whether or not crime and disorder are taking place. And if we can do that in a way, if we can do our work where we are just quietly operating in the background and keeping Lancaster County a safe place to live, work, and play without all of the visible evidence of police action in dealing with those issues, that's certainly the way that we want to operate. So again, those are the 9 Peelian principles that were created by Sir Robert Peel. Again, he established the London Metropolitan Police Force back in 1829. And those values and core ideas serve as the foundation for the mission and values of the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. And again, we've talked about these back in episode 0 when we kind of did our Sheriff's Office 101. But our mission, pulling from these Peelian principles, says that the mission of the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office is to provide exceptional law enforcement services that reduce crime, enhance public safety, and build public trust. And if you unpack that mission statement, those 3 pillars of reducing crime, enhancing public safety, and building public trust, you'll see those threads throughout all of those 9 Peelian principles. And our values that we hire by these values, we discipline by these values, we fire by these values, support that as well. And those 5 values are to treat everyone with fairness, dignity, and respect, act with integrity and professionalism, know your job and do it well, enjoy what you do, and lastly, work hard. Those are the values that, again, we hire, fire, and discipline by at the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. In this episode, wanted to just give you a little bit of insight into maybe what the recipe is that goes into our values, our mission, where that stuff comes from. And if you have any questions about this, certainly invite you to reach out to us on social media at LSO Nebraska. We're on Facebook, Instagram, X, YouTube, TikTok. You also send us an email, lso@lancaster.ne.gov. If you're interested in career opportunities at the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office, if these missions and if the mission and values of our office resonate with you, if Sir Robert Peel's 9 principles of policing resonate with you, there are several hundred agencies across the United States that share in these values with us, and we're happy to do that. But if you're looking for a job, a career to call home right here in Lincoln, Lancaster County, Nebraska, we would certainly invite you to check us out. And the best way to do that is to get in touch with us at www.joinlso.com. And we happen to be hiring for deputy sheriffs right now, and those applications will be open throughout the month of March 2024. Reach out to us. We'd love to have a recruiter get in touch with you, talk to you about options for you and what serving as a deputy sheriff at the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office might look like. But again, www.joinlso.com. That's all the time that we have for today's episode of the 902 podcast. We hope you enjoyed listening. If you want to check out our other episodes, be sure to follow and subscribe anywhere that you enjoy listening to podcasts: Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Google. You'll find the 902 podcast on all major podcasting platforms, including now availability on YouTube. Again, reach out to us, lso@lancaster.ne.gov with an email, or at social media at LSO Nebraska, and find us at www.joinlso.com if you're interested in career opportunities at the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.